Salutations and welcome. I am your host, Matthew DeSantis, and welcome to Amalfi Sports. In this episode, we travel to the state of Maryland Pimlico Racetrack for the Preakness Stakes, which is the second leg of horse racing's iconic Triple Crown. I appreciate to everyone who tuned in to my Kentucky Derby preview, and a big thanks if you're tuning back for this because my picks in the Derby, they didn't work out so well. So as much as I'd like to forget about those handicapping skills in that race, we're still going to revisit what happened in the Derby. We're going to talk a little bit about why it happened. And we're going to talk a lot about, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but we'll talk a bit about the drama that has ensued since the Kentucky Derby. But we'll spend the bulk of this episode previewing the horses in the field for the Preakness Stakes, going over what makes them either desirable or undesirable from a betting standpoint. And remember to tune in to NBC Sports to watch the Preakness Stakes on Saturday, May 15th at 6:50 p.m. Eastern Time. That is post time. So let us start by recapping what happened on the first Saturday in May at Churchill Downs. First of all, it was a beautiful day. Horses responded beautifully. I know last time I mentioned this was the first time a lot of these horses would be around a lot of people, a lot of noise, a lot of disruption. They handled it really well. You didn't see any horses get too agitated in the post parade. You didn't see any of them getting too agitated in the paddock. None of the horses seemed to be lathered up or needed to get run out. So, from a pre-race standpoint, looked really good. Once the race started, we saw a little bit of a surprise in that Medina Spirit. Bob Baffert's horse from out in California ended up winning the race at 12-1 odds. Coming in second was another long shot, Mandaloon, coming in with about a 26-1 long shot in second place. Third place was Hot Rod Charlie, who was among one of the favorites. And then fourth place was the favorite going into the race, Essential Quality. And those four horses kind of separated themselves from the field, both at the beginning and the end. And so those four horses also finished really close to each other and were in very close proximity. So it was an exciting stretch run, and those four horses were kind of the top tier. Now, just to list out the other horses to round out the top 10, coming in fifth was Obesos. Coming in sixth was Midnight Bourbon. Coming in seven was Keep Me in Mind. 8, Helium. 9, Known Agenda, my pick. And then 10th was Highly Motivated. So, what did we learn from the Kentucky Derby? Well, what we learned was that trips matter. And when I say trips, I mean the trip that horses get around the track. Because Medina Spirit got out to that lead early, used some early tactical speed, got out to the front of the pack, and was in the lead the entire way around. And there's a lot of benefit to that from a racing standpoint. If you have a horse and you're able to use that tactical speed to get to the front early, what you can do is kind of ease off the gas a little bit once you're there, save some energy around the back stretch and even early in the third turn. And then when it comes time to turn for home, you got a little bit left in the tank, which you definitely saw with Medina Spirit. But I should point out that Mandaloon, Hot Rod Charlie, and Essential Quality all were really in the top four for the vast majority of the race. So the horses that got out in front early, stayed out in front early, and finished out in front late. So that was, I think, the defining characteristic of the race was that the trips that these horses got from their respective jockeys really mattered. And John Velasquez did a great job riding Medina Spirit. Seasoned jockey has teamed up with Baffert, obviously, quite a bit. So that was one of those races where I think it was pretty obvious that it was going to be that type of a race early on, just because you saw some of those horses using that early tactical speed to get out in front and then really slow the pace down around the second turn down the back stretch. From my standpoint, my pick, Known Agenda, it didn't work out that well. I recorded the Kentucky Derby preview before the post positions were selected, and I'm not making excuses, but I think I probably would have been a little less excited about Known Agenda if I had known that it would draw the number one post position. So when you start on the very, very inside, the way Known Agenda did, you need to have a ton of early tactical speed because what happened, you need to get out in front because what happens is everybody, all those horses are going to come crashing down on the rail. And in the Derby, you're talking 19 horses. So a lot of horses are coming down because all those horses that are starting all the way out on the far edge of the track, they want to save ground and they want to get on the inside. They want their horse to run as little of a distance as possible. And the best way you can do that is ride on the inside rail. There was a famous Hall of Fame jockey, Calvin Burrell, who was referred to as his nickname was Calvin Bow Rail, because his horses always stayed on the inside and just would get on the inside. He'd stay on the inside. He never kick his horse out into the middle of the track coming down the home stretch. He'd always stay on the inside because his philosophy was that's the shortest distance basically between the starting gate and the final wire. So that's what he was going to do. So when you're in that number one pole position, you have to get out and get out well because all these other horses are going to come crashing down on you and you need to get out in front. And Known Agenda just does not have great early tactical speed. It's a fast horse, but not what I would say a quick horse. Doesn't have that sort of burst necessarily when you're talking about getting out in front quickly. And so when I was watching the race live, I remember, I mean, it couldn't have been more than, it was less than a furlong, probably half of a furlong, and I realized this race is over for Known Agenda. I mean, just within the first 15, 20 seconds of the race, it was obvious he was just going to get squeezed back, and he was kind of in the back third of the pack. And at that point, you never know how horses deal with getting dirt kicked up in their face for the first time in a lot of cases. And so just was not a great trip for Known Agenda. One of those things. But hey, that doesn't take anything away. Great trip for Medina Spirit, great trip for Mandaloun, Hot Rod Charlie, and Essential Quality. So those four finished in the top four. And the other thing I would say, the other big takeaway is that I think that the big takeaway from the Kentucky Derby was that there was not a super horse. And what I mean by that is there were a lot of good horses, but there weren't a lot of great horses. Nobody really pulled away. I mean, as I said, the front four horses kind of finished as the front four horses, and none of them were able to separate from each other. Now, you could say, well, that means we have four great horses. Well, I think it's more likely you have four pretty good horses that are all kind of right there. A lot of times when you're talking about a great horse, those great horses will make a move. And sometimes that means coming from behind and passing a lot of horses and pulling away down the stretch. Other times it means, even staying in the lead. So a horse like Medina Spirit that got into the lead, you could still make those kind of breathtaking moves. Uh, you know, I think immediately to American Pharaoh, running in the Belmont, the third leg of the Triple Crown. He he led that race wire to wire, but coming around the fourth turn, coming into the home stretch, he just, they gave him a little nudge and he went and he just started pulling away. And the other horses were all out. And next thing you know, he's 2 lengths ahead, 4 lengths ahead, 6 lengths ahead. He just kept pulling away. And that's what's impressive is when you see horses do that, when all of a sudden, when the jockey either puts the whip to them or just kind of cranks down on their neck a little bit and says, let's go. And all of a sudden, boom, that horse goes. And when that happens, it's breathtaking at times to see. And so you didn't see that. The jockeys asked for the horses to go and they went, but no horse really separated itself from anyone. So I think that that's one of the things I'll remember about the Kentucky Derby, an entertaining race for sure, but not one where I was blown away with any of the horses. And there wasn't even a horse that was kind of like coming on late. And then if you said, oh, if only that race was another furlong or another, even 16th of a mile, this horse would have made up all that ground. You didn't even really see that. So again, I think that's interesting when you considering who you might be betting on going in to the Preakness. Okay, so for as much suspense as there might have been during the Kentucky Derby, the big news is what happened the weekend after the Kentucky Derby when Bob Baffert, the trainer of Medina Spirit, announced that Medina Spirit had tested positive for a banned substance of betamethasone, which is anti-inflammatory. Now, it's important to point out that betamethasone is legal if it is disclosed, and it has to be flushed out of the system of the horse 2 weeks prior to the race. So it is something that horses can be on. It's not that illegal of a substance, but it's not something that can be traced in their blood when they actually race. Um, but the sample taken after the race showed trace amounts of beta methasone. And because of that, there is continued investigation into Medina Spirit. There is a second sample that was taken. So there's always two samples that are taken after the horse races. And now the second sample is going to be tested. If the second sample comes back as positive as well, then Medina Spirit will be stripped of the Kentucky Derby victory. Now, for those of you who bet on Medina Spirit, you don't need to return your money or anything like that. All bets are going to be maintained. The only people who would have to return money are the jockey, the trainer, and the owner. Okay. Now, that said, if the second sample comes back negative, then what happens is they largely consider the first sample a false positive and everything stands as is. But needless to say, there's a lot of controversy around this because Bob Baffert is no stranger to beta methasone. His horse that was in the Kentucky Oaks last year was disqualified for testing positive for the exact same substance. And this is a substance that several of his horses have tested positive for over the years. So, this is one of the kind of dark sides and black eyes in horse racing is that unfortunately there are a lot of trainers who use questionable medication and questionable substances on their horses. Again, goes back to breeding practices. You breed horses to be big and fast. Their joints start to wear down. You start using anti-inflammatories, steroids, diuretics in some cases. Bottom line is these horses are unfortunately, sometimes given those substances, and it's detrimental to their health, and that's why they're banned. And so, like I said, Baffert has been caught doing this before, and that's really disappointing. That really the biggest race in horse racing in the eyes of the public, that you would see this scandal emerge as well. What has been even more embarrassing is the attitude of Bob Baffert, who, listen, I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of Bob Baffert. I love his horses, but as a person, I don't know. He's always been a little bit of a sleazy character, I've always thought, but I think that about a lot of trainers, and I'll probably should probably keep that to myself to some extent. But the reality is that he came out and said, "Oh, we didn't give this horse any of this medication." And was really emphatic, said, "We're flying to Churchill Downs. We're going to fight this." Churchill Downs actually banned him then, said, "You can't race any of the horses there." He's lawyered up. He's going to challenge all of this. Then the next day, you heard this really cockamamie excuse that another horse that was on beta methasone in the same barn as Medina Spirit had peed in the hay, and then Medina Spirit ate the hay that was peed on, and then somehow consumed and absorbed the beta methasone. Okay, that's disgusting. B, that's just what horses do. C, that sounds like a really weak excuse. And then the next day, after this full-throated denial, Baffert comes out and goes, "Well, we did actually apply some cream that contained beta methasone on the joints of the horse." Oh, did you, Bob? Did you forget about that earlier? It was, come on. It was, again, it's just his lack of transparency and honesty in this situation. Just, it makes you question him in a lot of other ways. And so it was unfortunate that this sort of controversy marred the winner of the Kentucky Derby. But all of that said, the big news as it pertains to the Preakness was that there was some question about whether the state of Maryland would allow Medina Spirit to run in the Preakness. That because of the positive drug test, the state of Maryland could have said, "We are not allowing the horse to run in the Preakness because you're under this cloud of suspicion and we think the horse might still be tainted." Ultimately, the state of Maryland said, "We're going to allow Medina Spirit to run." So Medina Spirit is going to run in this week's Belmont, or I'm sorry, Preakness. And so I think that's a good transition. Let's talk a little bit about the Preakness and the field. So the Preakness is the second leg of the Triple Crown. It is the shortest of the Triple Crown races at 1.3 miles. A lot of people talk about the tighter turns around Pimlico. If you've ever watched a documentary about Secretariat, the amazing super horse, her or his owner, Penny Chettery, frequently talked about how she was worried that the Preakness was actually the race that she was most concerned about with Secretariat, because she thought the turns were so tight that his centripetal force might take him out wide because he was running so fast. Uh, Ended up not mattering because Secretariat quite literally had a heart that was twice the size of the other horses, and just, as some people would say, it just had a bigger motor, and that was part of the reason why he was a super horse. And so it was didn't end up being a factor, but it was something that is interesting to consider. There are tighter turns, how that plays in terms of jockeying for position, and when you ask your horse to kind of go for home, so to speak, especially in juxtaposition to the third leg of the Triple Crown we'll talk about in a couple weeks, the Belmont, that has these really wide and very long turns around 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So, it's an interesting juxtaposition between all those races. But the Preakness, like I said, is the second leg. It's 2 weeks after the Kentucky Derby. This is easily the shortest amount of time that these horses have had in terms of a layoff who ran in the Derby. And not all the horses in the Preakness ran in the Derby. And that's an important factor to consider that we'll talk about. Some did, some didn't. But I want to spend some time talking about those 10 horses that are in the Preakness, and we're going to run down them one at a time, starting with their post position. So the number one horse starting on the inside post is the horse Ram, which is trained by D. Wayne Lucas and ridden by Ricardo Santana Jr. Ram is coming off at 30-1. So real long shot there on the inside. And the inside isn't quite as big of a deal at the Preakness just because there's fewer horses. There's only 10 as opposed to 19. So there's not quite as much of a crunch that's going to happen on that inside rail. I still don't really love Ram's chances. I know it's always fun to bet on a long shot, but I actually think there's better long shots to bet on in this race. Uh, it took him 8 races until he finally won his first race. The 2 races that he has won most recently were against much lower level competition in claiming races and allowance races. Basically, these are races where you can just buy a horse off the track beforehand. So it was, uh, not a lot, not a great field that Ram won against in those races. Now, if there is one thing going for Ram, or maybe 2 things, one is that he hasn't raced since April 16th, so he'll have almost a month layoff, so well rested, as opposed to maybe some other horses in the field. And the other thing that will, I'm sure, drive some votes and will probably drive down that on until the post time is that he is the offspring of American Pharaoh, the Triple Crown winner. And if you think maybe he's got a little bit of that magic that American Pharaoh had, then you might decide I'm going to put $2 on him and see what happens. And that's, it's tempting. You do want to certainly look at connections that can oftentimes be predictive of how horses are. What I will say is there's not been a ton of great horses coming out of America. American Pharaoh is still a little bit of a mystery in terms of how he will be as a sire. And so Ram hasn't done anything to make me think that, this is going to be some amazing super sire in terms of American Pharaoh. So, you should bet on his offspring sort of a thing. So I don't know. Like I said, long shot, I wouldn't put too much uh, money on Ram or pay him much consideration in terms of thinking where he might finish in the money. So let's move to the second horse, number 2 horse, uh, Keep Me in Mind, which is trained by Rupertino Diodoro and is ridden by David Cohen. Keep Me in Mind is coming off at 15-1. Now, Keep Me in Mind raced in the Derby, finished 7th. Did have a tough trip, went pretty wide around the turns and was pretty wide actually even down the back stretch. So didn't get the best trip. Ran a little bit of a further distance than the other horses that were a little closer to the inside rail. So, there's some legitimate um, reason for optimism, maybe to say, well, he didn't get the best trip, still finished 7th. Maybe with a better trip, he can finish a little bit higher. Maybe. David Cohen is the jockey. Is this first time he's running in the Preakness? I'm not thrilled about that. I typically like jockeys who are a little bit more experienced and veteran. And it's also important to point out that Keep Me in Mind has only ever won as a 2-year-old, has not yet won as a 3-year-old. So Keep Me in Mind coming off at 15-1. I just don't love those odds. And I don't really even like putting him as pairing with an exacta or a trifecta box. So let's move to the 3-horse Medina Spirit that is going off as the betting line favorite at 9-5 currently. And listen, we've talked a lot about the horse, obviously trained by Bob Baffert, jockeyed by John Velasquez, Hall of Famers, both of them. Um, Already won the Derby, experienced jockey. And listen, if this was any other sport, I'd say, geez, is all of this controversy going to affect the athlete, right? If this was football or baseball or the Olympics or something like that, and somebody had tested positive and was, or there was controversy around a figure, you go, how's that going to wear on their mental state going into the race? The beauty is the horse has no idea the horse tested positive. The horse doesn't know there's controversy. Now, granted, everybody else around the horse does. And so you worry, is John Velasquez going to tighten up a little bit? Are there going to be those nerves? Horses, I will say, are some of the most intuitive animals I've ever been around, and they do sense nervousness and they do sense fear to some extent, and they will react to that, and by acting up in a lot of cases. So you never know. I mean, like again, John Velasquez is a pro. He's been around horses his whole life. He's a Hall of Fame jockey. This is not going to be a big deal, but it's something just to think about and keep in mind. Again, he's also not an elite horse, so again, I would not. He's the betting line favorite. I understand that. He's never calling off a 2-week layoff. He's never run on that short of a layoff. So I don't know. I'm not the biggest Medina Spirit fan. I still have not drank the Kool-Aid on that. He wins the Preakness. Listen, I'll put $2 down on the Belmont then for him to win. But until then, I'm going to hold off. The number 4 horse, Crowded Trade. This is a horse that's trained by Chad Brown. I spoke about Chad Brown a little bit in the last session that we had, last video we had about the Kentucky Derby. And Brown is a great trainer, an Eclipse Award winning trainer, which goes to the best trainer. It's the name of the award. And ridden by Javier Castellano, great jockey. Horse is going off at 10-1. Um, there's some things I like about this horse. There are also some things I don't like about this horse. So Crowded Trade last raced on April 3rd. So nice, about a 5-6 week layoff. So that's good if you're looking for positives. Okay. Um, Good connections. Like I said, Chad Brown, although you'll remember, I mentioned Chad Brown is a great trainer for turf horses, for horses that are running on the grass. He does not have as much success on dirt. That's not to say he doesn't have any success. He does. Um, but he has not had a lot of success in these big races on dirt in the same way he has won almost every big race on turf with his horses. So great turf training horse, or a great turf trainer. Um, it's also important to point out the last time Crowded Trade ran, it was at the Wood Memorial, and he finished behind 2 Derby entries. He finished third in that race at the Wood Memorial. He finished behind Bourbonic and Dynamic One. The reason I go is because Bourbonic finished 13th in the Derby and Dynamic One finished 18th in the Derby, and he finished behind both of them. So that doesn't give me a ton of confidence that he's going to be ready for this level of competition. Maybe. Additionally, he's only ever raced at Aqueduct up in New York. So there's, I think, some concern there. How's he going to respond to a new track, a new dirt? That is something horses can be very temperamental about. So certainly something to keep in mind. Again, I don't love putting money on Crowded Trade. The first 4 I'm not enamored with. You could probably guess where I'm eventually going to be going because we're going to run out of horses here soon. So the 5th horse, Midnight Bourbon. Now, Midnight Bourbon did run in the Derby, trained by Steve Asmussen. Going off at 5-1 odds. I really like Midnight Bourbon here. Why do I like Midnight Bourbon? Because of his jockey. Steve Asmussen made a switch and brought in my opinion, right now, the hottest and the best jockey in horse racing, Irad Ortiz Jr. If you don't believe me, go back and watch any of the races at Saratoga last year. Irad Ortiz Jr. He won everything. He is a phenomenal jockey. And listen, some of it is he knows how to pick the right horse and he gets on good rides, but he knows how to ride them. He knows how to have a horse navigate a field. He understands what the horse needs, when to push the horse, when to hold back. Is a brilliant, brilliant jockey. He does not have the history that some of these other jockeys do. He's not necessarily a household name for common people who don't follow horse racing that closely. But for those of us who do, Irad Ortiz Jr. is a stud of a jockey. And so Asmussen brings in Irad Ortiz Jr. to ride Midnight Bourbon. I love that decision. And so great jockey. He also, Midnight Bourbon, did not have the greatest trip at the Derby. He finished sixth, so respectable. I mean, not that far off. And so you go, well, listen, you put a better jockey on this horse. He has a better trip. It's not improbable to think that Midnight Bourbon is a real shot to win this. I really like Midnight Bourbon. We'll talk a little bit more about how I'd like to pair him on some of my bets when we get to that. In the number 6 horse, let's move to this. Rombauer. And that sounds like, I grew up in Pennsylvania Dutch country. That sounds like a last name of somebody I would have gone to school with. Rombauer. That's a Pennsylvania Dutch name if I ever heard it. And maybe I should probably do some additional digging to see why they named him Rombauer. But Rombauer is the number 6 horse. Trainer is Michael McCarthy. Jockey is Flavien Prat. Going off at 12-1. Some things to like about this horse. Last ran in the Bluegrass, so again about a 6-week layoff in between races, so should be pretty good. Finished third in that Bluegrass race behind Essential Quality, who was the Derby favorite. So, finished third, but certainly didn't lose to a slouch. I mean, lost to a very good horse, a very respectable horse. Um, Also finished second at the American Pharoah race at Santa Anita as a 2-year-old. So he's had some good finishes in high profile races. He's finished in the money. Solid horse. Has some good Equibase speed numbers. That's a little granular and a little kind of inside baseball numbers. For those of you who follow horse racing closely, those numbers are indicative of how well the horse runs in different races. So Rombauer has some good speed numbers in there. And I like I said, I think he's a solid horse at 12-1. Definitely a horse I'd consider putting a flyer on in terms of finishing in the money as an exacta or a trifecta or a superfecta box. Um, so I definitely think the horse has a shot. Like I said, has held its own in pretty high profile races. I wouldn't expect the horse to win, uh, but again, finish second or third, I can totally see that happening. This is a horse that has a good profile for finishing second or third, uh, and is kind of at a good price to pair with some of the front runners. So our number 7 horse, let's move to the number 7 horse, Francisco de Ina. Francisco de Ina is going off at 20-1, is trained by Hideki Mori, and is ridden by Joel Rosario. This is a horse from Japan, and it's the first Japanese horse to enter the Preakness since 2016. Now, for those of you who love golf, you might say, well, listen, Matthew, Hideki Matsuyama just became the first Japanese player to win an American Masters and win a major. I'm going to put my money on a Japanese horse. Hey, go for it. More power to you. If you think that there's, maybe something in the water over there that's helping out these horses and helping out these athletes, that's great. But not a great profile. Like I said, going off at 20-1, you don't typically see horses coming from overseas having a ton of success in the American states. That trip can be pretty taxing. The horse has actually spent significant amount of time the last several weeks quarantining and traveling. So you do worry about how does that affect the horse. Decent connections. I mean, Mori and Rosario are very well respected. So a respected trainer and a respected jockey. So certainly should be taken seriously. The problem is that the horse last ran March 27th. So now you're starting to get into like a 7-week layoff. You start to worry about that a little bit. Is that a little too much of a layoff? A little too rusty? Again, because of all the quarantine and the traveling, that's part of the reason why. And then the last race it was in was the United Arab Emirates Derby, and it finished 6th at the Derby, at the UAE Derby. So, last finish was not that inspiring. I just don't love it. 20-1. just don't love those odds. I mean, maybe if it was 30 to 1, you put a flyer on it, but at 20 to 1, that's way too good of a price, I think, for a horse of this caliber. So don't love the number 7 horse. Let's move to number 8, Unbridled Honor. And this is a Todd Pletcher horse that is jockeyed by Louis Size. Again, good connections. Pletcher, first ballot Hall of Famer. Size, very well respected jockey. Unbridled Honor is going off at 15 to 1. Good horse. I like this horse. I don't love this horse to win. I don't like that at all. But kind of like Rumbauer, this is a horse I could see finishing in the money. Last raced at the Lexington Stakes on April 10th. So again, not all that long ago. But not too long ago, not like that March 27th race. So about a month, little over a month layoff, so should be fresh. It's important to point out was finished second place at the Lexington Stakes and was going off at 20 to 1. So it was a little bit of a long shot going into the Lexington Stakes and finished second. The horse seems to punch above its weight like that. I mean, if you look at his profile, the horse consistently goes off at higher odds and then finishes much better than those odds would dictate. So it makes me think this is a horse that is actually a lot of times undervalued. And so you might actually get a pretty good value here on this horse. Like I said, good lineage, good connections. I would certainly consider taking a flyer and pairing this with maybe one or two other favorites in a trifecta box or a superfecta box. Again, you don't really want to bet against guys like Todd Pletcher all that often. Good trainer, although is looking for his first Preakness win, but still Unbridled Honor, very solid horse that consistently finishes, in the money in a lot of cases. So let's move to the number 9 horse, Risk Taking. And that is, again, trained by Chad Brown and jockeyed by Jose Ortiz. Jose Ortiz is, of course, the brother of Irad Ortiz Jr. So you get kind of two brothers there. They race against each other pretty regularly. So, I'm sure the media will kind of play up a little bit of a rivalry for the casual sports fan. For those of us who watch them, like I said, they race against each other a lot. And so this is not a new coincidence or a new circumstance for them. They're professional about this. Risk taking as a horse, again, I don't love it. Chad Brown is a great trainer. I mean, everything I said before still holds true. But the last time this horse ran was at the Wood Memorial, 7th place finish. Kind of uninspiring. Won a grade 3 race in New York back in February before the Wood Memorial. But again, this, it's a big step up then to the Wood Memorial. Didn't perform that well. This is obviously another big step up with the Preakness. Again, at 15 to 1, I just don't love those odds. I mean, for a horse that I just go, man, I think those are pretty long odds for him to win. 15 to 1 is just not rich enough for my blood to put in even a little bit of money on him. And it's just not demonstrated the ability to finish in the top 3 in this level of competition. And that brings us to our final 10th horse on the very outside post position, which is another Bob Baffert horse, Concert Tour. And Concert Tour, as I said, is trained by Bob Baffert, jockeyed by Hall of Famer Mike Smith, and is going off at 5 to 2. And so it's the second leading favorite behind Medina Spirit. So Bob Baffert's horses are 1 and 2 in terms of betting line favorites. Again, great connections with Baffert and Smith. Hall of Fame trainer, Hall of Fame jockey. Disappointing third place at the Arkansas Derby. That was his last race, and that was on April 10th. Finished third. Had been 3-0 before then, so had been undefeated going into the Arkansas Derby and finished third in the Derby, in the Arkansas Derby. Therefore, skipped the Kentucky Derby to go straight to the Preakness. I like this horse a lot. I actually like this horse a lot more than Medina Spirit. I would not be surprised if this horse actually becomes the betting line favorite by the time post time comes around on Saturday. Um, there's a lot to like here. I like the layoff. I like the fact that this horse, even when he lost in the Arkansas Derby, still finished third, finished in the money. So didn't give up. Really drove hard through the finish. Is well rested and ready to go. And so I like this. Mike Smith is also a very, very, very good jockey. And so you always have to take horses jockeyed by Mike Smith very seriously. And he and Baffert have a really great connection, a long partnership between the two of them. So, Bob Baffert is a guy who trusts Mike Smith on his best horses. And so that should really tell you everything you need to know about what he thinks of both Mike Smith and Concert Tour. So I really like Concert Tour a lot. I actually think taking some time to regroup, that's sometimes really good for a horse after they lose the first time, take some time off and then kind of get going again. So that's the field for the Preakness. So let's actually move into predictions. We ran through everybody, so you probably couldn't get a sense of where I'm going here. And when it comes time to make predictions and talking about some betting, it's always important. You want to find value. Anybody can go and put $2 down on the morning line favorite. Is that good value though? You want to find where's their value on the card in terms of betting on some long shots, betting on some some horses that might be the third or fourth favorite in the field, things like that. So you want to look for value. So if you're looking for a trifecta, and that's again just you're picking your top 3 horses, can finish in any order if you make it a trifecta box. If you just make it a regular trifecta, you have to hit the exact order. But if you go trifecta box, then it can finish first, second, or third in that those 3 horses can finish in any order in the top 3. Trifecta, I like Concert Tour, Midnight Bourbon, and Rombauer. I like those. That would be my trifecta box. If you wanted to go with Unbridled Honor in there instead of Rombauer, I wouldn't be upset with you. If you honestly, if you do a superfecta, which is your top 4, I would definitely throw an Unbridled Honor as the 4th horse then in that kind of superfecta box. So trifecta, like I said, Concert Tour, Midnight Bourbon, Rombauer. Exacta box, I would probably the easy bet or the safe bet would be something like Concert Tour and Midnight Bourbon. I think the value bet would be going with one of those 2 and Rombauer and Unbridled Honor. So if you're looking for a little bit more of a payoff, a little bit more risk, I might do something like Concert Tour and Rombauer or Midnight Bourbon and Unbridled Honor as an exacta box. You're going to get a really good return on those compared to the other horses in the field. So we talked about the bets, we've talked about the horses, we've talked about illegal substances and blood samples and all sorts of things and centripetal force. We've talked about all that. Now it comes time to actually pick the winner, and I am going to go with, drum roll please, Midnight Bourbon. That is my pick. First of all, I've never been opposed to having a little sip of bourbon at midnight, so I like the name of the horse. But more than anything, I like Irad Ortiz Jr. I'm betting on the jockey. I saw him win too many races in 2020 in Saratoga to bet against this kid. And he is a kid. He's I don't want to say 23 years old. He is a stud. I love Irad Ortiz Jr. as a jockey. I think and Steve Asmussen is a great trainer. I think Midnight Bourbon didn't get the best ride at the Derby. I think a mile and 3/16 might be a little bit of a better distance. So I'm going Midnight Bourbon. So that's my pick for the winner of the Preakness Stakes. We'll see if it plans out, and you could come back and let me know what you think for the Belmont. So until next time, enjoy the Preakness Stakes, make some crab cakes, drink a black-eyed Susan, and have fun. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Amalfi Sports at the Preakness Stakes. Make sure to check out all of the great content at Amalfi Media, including subscribing to our YouTube feed, and go to our website at amalfimedia.com for more information about all of our shows and podcasts. Until next time, and until the Belmont, I'm Matthew DeSantis, and it's now post time.